What unfolds when one of cinema's most forthright stars crosses paths with a late-night host unaccustomed to unrehearsed candor? The result, a volatile confrontation so charged that network higher-ups were forced to intervene, leaving audiences speechless and sparking a digital wildfire of speculation. The evening Mark Wahlberg sat down for what was meant to be a routine publicity appearance on the evening hour quickly unraveled into something far less predictable. What began as standard promotional fare descended into a simmering verbal standoff, ultimately ending with Wahlberg being quietly ushered off set during a break, never to return for the second half. But before we dive into the exchange that shattered the illusion of friendly banter between Mark Wahlberg and host Michael Goldi, don't forget to subscribe and enable notifications. What you're about to discover reveals a side of the talk show world that networks would prefer to keep hidden. And tell us in the comments, have you ever seen that on-air smile falter just a little too long? The show started with all the trappings of a typical segment. Applause filled the studio as Wahlberg emerged, exuding his trademark confidence. He greeted Everett with a firm handshake before settling into the guest seat. Lighthearted chatter followed, updates on recent projects, a few predictable jokes, and nods to Wahlberg's famously disciplined lifestyle. "So, Mark, I hear you start your day at 4:30 a.m. with a workout," Everett said, his grin hinting at an impending punchline. "That's right," Wahlberg responded earnestly. "Routine and discipline keep me grounded. It's how I've stayed the course all these years." Then came the first ripple of unease. Instead of transitioning to a new topic, Everett leaned into mockery, exaggerating his expression for the crowd. "Let's be real, no one needs to wake up that early unless they're farming or delivering bread," he joked, hoping the audience would bite. "Isn't that just a touch over the top?" Wahlberg, always known for his blunt approach, didn't indulge the bit. "Look, Graham, I get that different people find balance in different ways. This is what works for me. I've built a career on consistency and effort." The camera briefly caught a flicker of irritation cross Everett's face. It wasn't the first time he had bristled at a guest who didn't fall in line with his comedic rhythm. But what followed took even seasoned fans by surprise. As Wahlberg transitioned into discussing his new movie, he reflected on how the character's background resonated with his own upbringing in the working-class neighborhoods of Detroit. "I don't ever want to lose sight of where I came from. That truth matters when I'm choosing roles." Everett cut in sharply. "Yeah, but in today's social climate, don't you think there's something a bit problematic about constantly glorifying the blue-collar experience when your life now is worlds apart?" The mood in the room shifted. Laughter gave way to an uncomfortable stillness. Wahlberg, visibly thrown by the unexpected pivot, adjusted his posture. "I'm not sure I understand," he replied, his Detroit accent subtly intensifying, a telltale sign of discomfort. "I'm not making any political statement. I just respect hard work and staying true to your beginnings." What happened next peeled back the shiny surface of late-night television. Instead of pulling back, Everett pressed harder. "Some might argue it's easy to champion those roots from behind the gates of a luxury estate," he said, voice tightening. "Especially when much of your fanbase is struggling to get by." The camera captured the confusion in the audience. Gone was the usual warmth. In its place, puzzled expressions and an unsettled hush. Wahlberg paused, then responded with calm resolve. "I came here to talk about my film, not to defend my personal life or be cross-examined. I've earned everything through honest work, and I've never claimed to be anyone else." Off to the side, a producer flailed subtly for attention, trying to reel the host back in. But Everett, now more inquisitor than entertainer, leaned forward. "Don't you think public figures have an obligation to acknowledge their advantages, especially when they profit off of an image that no longer matches their reality?" The silence that followed was deafening. Not a chuckle. Not a clap. Wahlberg stayed poised, though a flicker of tension tightened his jaw. "I believe public figures should be truthful," he said flatly. "And to be honest, Graham, I'm beginning to think this invite was a setup. If you wanted a political debate, maybe book someone who actually debates politics." And just as the conversation teetered on the edge of full-blown confrontation, the screen faded abruptly to a commercial slightly earlier than usual, according to sources close to the production. When the show resumed, Everett sat alone, offering no commentary on Wahlberg's sudden departure. He glided into the next segment as though nothing had gone awry. But outside the studio, the storm had already broken. Viewers flooded the internet with questions, theories, and screenshots. Something had cracked and audiences had seen it live. According to numerous crew members present that evening, the friction between Wahlberg and Everett didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. Heated voices echoed from behind the set walls, and off-air confrontation intense enough that network executives swiftly stepped in, opting to remove Wahlberg from the remainder of the program rather than risk a further escalation. When the broadcast resumed, what had transpired in the shadows during that commercial break painted a starkly different portrait of Michael Goldi. Gone was the polished late-night persona. As soon as the studio lights dimmed, Everett tore off his microphone and marched toward Wahlberg, his expression hardened. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Everett snapped, the facade of amiable host vanishing. "This is my platform. You don't come here and dictate how an interview should go." Wahlberg, who had stayed seated until that moment, stood up, physically and figuratively rising to meet the challenge. He towered over Everett, calm but resolute. "I came here to discuss my work, not to become your political target," he replied, his voice unwavering. "Where I'm from, guests are treated with basic courtesy." The exchange, witnessed by several stunned crew members, left no doubt about the tension between the two men. One production assistant whispered to a colleague, her voice barely audible above the rising tension. "I've never seen him lose it like this." Everett pressed on, stepping closer, his finger pointed squarely at Wahlberg's chest. "You know what your problem is, Mark? You think your working-class past gives you some kind of moral clarity. But you've been living in luxury for years now. You're no more connected to that world than I am." Wahlberg's jaw flexed, but he kept his composure. "And you think wrapping your jabs in humor makes it okay to blindside your guests? I've always been upfront. Can you say the same?" At that point, senior executives were summoned. When they arrived, they found both men locked in a standoff. The lead producer hurried to Everett's side, whispering urgently while glancing nervously at Wahlberg. "We have to move on. 2 more segments. Another guest's waiting." Everett didn't budge. "I'm not going back out there with him," he said, loud enough for half the room to hear. "It's him or me." For a moment, silence stretched across the space. The producer looked back and forth as if hoping someone else might make the decision for him. This was unfamiliar territory for a show prized for its seamless control. "You serious right now?" Wahlberg asked, disbelief in his tone. "You're kicking me off because I wouldn't let you drag me through the mud?" Everett turned toward him, voice firm, eyes narrowed. "This isn't a movie set where you call the shots. This is my stage. And here, it's my rules." At last, the executive producer stepped in. What he said would soon ripple through the industry. "Mark, I think it's best if we reschedule your appearance, maybe when things are less charged." Wahlberg glanced between Everett and the producer. Something in his gaze shifted, recognition, perhaps. "So that's how it goes. He throws a fit and I'm the 1 cent packing." "It's not personal," the producer began, but Wahlberg cut him off. "Everything about this is personal," he said as he peeled off his mic. "This whole segment was a setup. Those questions weren't about my film, they were about turning me into a soundbite." As security cautiously approached to offer an escort, Wahlberg raised his hands. "Don't bother. I know the way out." The tension in the room was nearly tangible. Wahlberg collected his belongings without another word. Just before reaching the exit, he turned back toward Everett. "You know what separates us, Stephen? I pretend for a living, but I never stop being myself once the camera is off. Can you honestly say the same?" Everett's face darkened, but he said nothing. Crew members stood frozen, unsure of whether to intervene or vanish. One young assistant stepped forward, quietly handing Wahlberg a personal item he'd left behind. "For what it's worth," she said softly, "this isn't the first time." Wahlberg gave a knowing nod. "Won't be the last, either." Meanwhile, Everett huddled with his writing staff, frantically rewriting the rest of the episode. "No mention of what just happened," he instructed. "Bring the musical act forward. I'll stretch the monologue." Out in the audience, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just passed through backstage, viewers waited for the program to resume. In the green room, the next guest, a well-known actress promoting her own film, watched the monitors with a furrowed brow. "Is everything okay?" she asked a staffer passing by. "That last segment felt off." "Just a quick scheduling change," came the rehearsed reply. Mr. Wahlberg had to leave unexpectedly. Back on stage, the floor manager counted down to return from commercial. Everett inhaled deeply, straightened his tie, and summoned his practiced charm. The mask was back on. "We're back in 5, 4, 3. 2 fingers. 1. Cue." "Welcome back," Everett said, smooth as silk, his tone betraying none of the storm behind the scenes. "Unfortunately, Mark Wahlberg had to step out early, but we've still got a great show ahead." A murmur moved through the crowd. Some exchanged glances, sensing that something wasn't quite right. Still, the program pressed on, a carefully orchestrated illusion held together by bright lights, cue cards, and the silent pact that the show must always go on. Outside the brightly lit studio, Wahlberg brushed past the swarm of waiting paparazzi with a curt remark. "Just watch the show," he said, climbing into the black SUV waiting by the curb. "It speaks for itself." Already on the phone with his publicist, the vehicle pulled into the Manhattan night, headlights cutting through the early evening haze. Inside, during the next commercial break, the mood behind the scenes darkened further. Michael Goldi's carefully composed mask slipped again, this time directed at his own team. "Who signed off on him?" he barked, flinging a script onto a nearby desk. "Did anyone bother checking his talking points?" We looked completely caught off guard out there. A junior producer stepped forward, voice uncertain. "Sir, we sent over the usual pre-interview brief." His reps were told it'd be a standard promo slot, just press for the film. "Standard doesn't mean soft," Everett snapped, eyes flashing. "We have an obligation to press our guests, especially when they think they're just here to sell tickets." There was a pause. Another producer, perhaps emboldened or perhaps just careless, asked what many were thinking. Even if the guest was told it wouldn't be political? Everett stared him down, cold and cutting. "Especially then. No one walks in here expecting a free pass." Nearby, a staff writer murmured to a colleague, "Funny how that standard only seems to apply when it's someone he already doesn't like." The next segment began, but the tension lingered. Crew members exchanged wary glances. Something meaningful had happened, and they all knew it. One camera operator mouthed across the floor, "This is going to leak." And by dawn it had. Audience members took to social media recounting the oddness of what they'd witnessed. "Craziest taping I've ever attended," wrote one attendee. Wahlberg was there, then gone. Everett acted like it was business as usual, but the air was weird. Production staff confirmed that Everett remained irritable for the rest of the night, snapping over minor cues and forbidding any discussion of the incident. "If anyone breathes a word of this to the press," he warned during the last break, "you're out. No second chances." But the silence he demanded had already broken. Viewers were piecing together the cracks they'd seen on air with whispers from the crew. Reporters began calling insiders, and texts between entertainment journalists spread like wildfire. Though the final broadcast offered no clues about Wahlberg's exit, accounts from within began to surface. He hadn't left the building immediately. Instead, he made his way to Everett's dressing room, where the host had retreated with his senior staff. A sharp knock on the door cut through their huddled conversation. "We need to talk," Wahlberg said through the door. "Just you and me. Not for the cameras." Inside, Everett's executive producer leaned toward the door. "Mr. Everett isn't available right now." "I wasn't asking you," Wahlberg replied, his tone cool but unmistakably serious. "I'm not leaving until we clear the air." A long moment passed. Then the door opened. Everett stood there, lips tight. "5 minutes," he said. "Alone." The room emptied, leaving the two men face to face. "What was that out there?" Wahlberg asked, gesturing vaguely toward the stage. "I poured 2 years into that project, came here in good faith to talk about it, and you tried to make me into some political scapegoat." Everett folded his arms. "My show doesn't exist just to boost box office numbers. We tackle real subjects here." Wahlberg raised an eyebrow. "Real subjects? You call what you did tackling issues? That wasn't journalism. That was showboating." Everett's face flushed. "You celebrities come in here thinking you're owed kid glove treatment." "I come in expecting the interview you promised," Wahlberg shot back. "Your producers told us this was about the film. If you wanted a debate, you should have said so up front." The air between them grew heavier. Everett moved behind his desk, subtly reinforcing his authority. It was a calculated move, reclaiming control through posture and position. "My audience expects candor. If a guest can't handle that, maybe they shouldn't be here." Wahlberg remained standing. "No. Your audience expects to be entertained. Maybe to learn something, but not to watch you interrogate people who don't toe your ideological line." Everett stiffened. "You really don't get it, do you? This isn't just about your movie. And you really don't get how far removed you are from the people watching at home," Wahlberg replied. "They're not tuning in for lectures. They want conversation. They want authenticity." Just then, a knock interrupted them. 3 minutes, Mr. Everett called the stage manager from outside. Everett stood, clearly eager to end the exchange. "We're done." "Yeah," Wahlberg said. "We are. But let me leave you with this." He paused, locking eyes with Everett. "I started with nothing. I clawed my way here, and I've never forgotten what that felt like. Can you say the same? Or have you been in this echo chamber so long you've forgotten how to speak to people who don't already agree with you?" For the first time, Everett didn't immediately respond. Something flickered across his face, a momentary crack in the mask. Recognition? Embarrassment? Regret? But it passed in a blink, replaced by the same guarded neutrality he wore on set. My audience knows exactly what I'm doing, Everett replied coolly. Wahlberg nodded slightly. Maybe your audience does, he said. But what about everyone else? You used to be the guy who could talk to anybody, now it feels like you're just echoing the same ideas back to the same crowd. Before Everett could answer, the dressing room door creaked open and the executive producer stepped in, headset in place. We need you back on set. Now. Wahlberg turned to go. Good luck with the rest of your show, he said over his shoulder. Something tells me you're gonna need it. As he walked down the hallway toward the exit, Wahlberg passed the green room where a young actress, nervous and fresh-faced, was flipping through her cue cards. She looked up, concern etched on her features. Is everything okay? She asked, having sensed the unusual silence in the studio earlier. Just a little creative disagreement, Wahlberg said with a wry smile. Word to the wise, keep it about the movie. She nodded, her grip tightening around the cue cards. Back on set, Everett sat silently as a makeup artist patted his brow, the sweat betraying more than just the heat of the stage lights. His eyes darted to the monitors, then to his producer. How are we spinning this? The producer asked in a low voice. We're not, Everett muttered. No mentions. Move the band up. I'll pad the monologue in the second half. The crowd saw the tension, the producer warned. Pretending nothing happened might backfire. Then let them wonder, Everett said, his tone brittle. This is still my show. I decide how we shape the narrative. As the countdown to airtime resumed, Everett straightened his tie and reset his expression. By the time the cameras rolled again, the amiable host was back in place, his signature smile polished, his voice smooth as glass. Welcome back to the evening hour, he said with practiced ease. Unfortunately, Mark Wahlberg had to leave a bit early, but we've still got an incredible lineup ahead. The applause sign flashed, but the audience response was subdued. Scattered murmurs rippled across the studio. Something had broken, and the crowd sensed it. In the control room, the director turned to the executive producer with a furrowed brow. We're seriously not acknowledging what just happened? Orders from the top, came the flat reply. Pretend it never happened. But the audience couldn't forget so easily. The electricity in the room had changed. Laughter came slower, applause felt mechanical. The unspoken agreement between host and viewer that what unfolded on stage was genuine had been shaken. Meanwhile, Wahlberg had exited the building and re-entered the city night. Outside, paparazzi clamored for comment. He offered none beyond a second, succinct refrain. Watch the show. It speaks for itself. As his SUV rolled away, his phone buzzed. Dwayne Johnson's name lit up the screen. Just saw the feed blow up, Johnson said when Wahlberg answered. You all right? I'm good, Wahlberg replied, gazing back at the studio growing smaller in the rearview. Just reminded why I usually stick to talking about the work. Let me guess, Johnson said with a knowing tone. One more host who thinks he's running a courtroom, not a show? Pretty much, Wahlberg sighed. I'd have been glad to talk about class and privilege if it was honest. But that wasn't the play. He came looking for a gotcha, and when I didn't give him one, he didn't know what to do. Back in the studio, the rest of the show carried on with a strange theatricality. Everett's jokes landed with less energy. His smile lingered too long. His conversation with the musical guest felt over-rehearsed, almost frantic, as though he were trying to paste over the rift that had fractured the evening's flow. During the final commercial break, he pulled his head writer aside. We'll have to address this tomorrow, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. Social's already in flames. What's the move? Do we walk it back? Turn it into a joke? Or stand firm, the writer asked. Everett hesitated. We spin it as a misunderstanding. Say we had to cut for time. Nothing about backstage. Keep it tight. Will that even hold? The writer asked. Half the audience saw it unfold. They're not going to buy a timing issue. It has to hold, Everett said, a note of unease creeping in. Because the alternative is admitting I lost control of my own set. As the episode came to a close and the crowd filed out, their quiet conversations echoed louder than the show itself. Did you see his face when Everett started in on him? One guest whispered to another. It was like he couldn't believe it was happening. And then they just acted like none of it happened, her friend replied. Like we didn't all witness that crack open in real time. Later that night, both men retreated to their separate worlds. Wahlberg, surrounded by family, focused on the next leg of his press tour, already moving past the encounter. Everett, by contrast, remained glued to his phone, scrolling through threads, tweets, recaps, and growing increasingly frustrated at the way the narrative was slipping from his grasp. In that single unscripted moment, both revealed exactly who they were. Wahlberg grounded, direct, unafraid of discomfort. Everett disciplined, sharp, but unnerved when the conversation veered outside the lane he had carefully scripted. And perhaps that's why this story struck such a chord. In an entertainment industry fueled by controlled messaging and curated personas, the rawness of their exchange felt real. The script had been shattered, and for once, what came through wasn't performance, it was truth. In a world where everyone's playing a part, those rare moments of unrehearsed authenticity are what people remember. If this breakdown of the Wahlberg-Everett standoff gave you a fresh perspective on the blurred line between performance and reality in Hollywood, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We've got more deep dives coming your way. But now it's your turn. Was Everett justified in confronting Wahlberg, or did he cross a line? Let us know in the comments.